It happened. The thing every economist warned about, every diplomat tried to prevent, every market analyst prayed would stay hypothetical. It just happened. The President of the United States signed an executive order invoking Section 301, launching the most aggressive economic offensive against an allied nation in modern American history. 60% tariffs on Canadian goods, frozen bank assets, visa restrictions for Canadian nationals, not against China, not against Iran, against Canada, the country that shares the longest undefended border on Earth with the United States, the country that supplies 50% of America's imported oil, and within 72 hours of that signature, the Dow Jones collapsed 800 points in a single session. Oil futures spiked 12%. Natural gas surged 18%. American airline stocks lost a third of their market value, not because of a war in the Middle East, not because of a pandemic, because one man decided to pick a fight with the country keeping America's lights on. Visual prompt, a dramatic split screen. Left side, Trump signing an executive order at the Resolute desk, American flags behind him. Right side, a red stock market ticker showing Dow 800. Giant white text overlay reads, Section 301, Economic War. Cinematic 8K, dark tones are 16:9. Let me show you exactly what Trump did, what Canada did back, and why this single week may have just redrawn the economic map of North America permanently. The justification was almost laughable. Digital services taxes and environmental regulations. That is it. Canada charges a 3% tax on revenue earned by large tech platforms operating in Canadian markets, the same kind of tax France, the UK, Italy, Spain, and India already enforce, and environmental standards on imported goods, carbon border adjustments that the European Union also implements. Two policies that half the developed world already has on their books. Trump called them an attack on American business. His trade representative called them hostile economic behavior. And then they pulled the trigger. Section 301, the same legal mechanism used against China in 2018, the same tool that launched a trade war costing American consumers over $80 billion in higher prices, now aimed at America's closest ally. But here is the part nobody in Washington expected. Canada did not flinch. Canada did not negotiate. Canada did not send a diplomatic note asking for talks. Canada hit back harder than any ally in the history of the Western Alliance. Visual prompt. Mark Carney standing at a podium in Ottawa, Canadian flag behind him, looking directly into the camera with calm intensity. A lower third graphic reads, Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, activated. Golden and steel tones, 8K cinematic, are 16:9. Within 48 hours of Trump's executive order, Prime Minister Mark Carney activated the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. Read that name again. Critical infrastructure protection. This is not a trade policy. This is a national security instrument. And here is what it authorizes. First, oil. Canada supplies the United States with 4 million barrels of crude oil every single day. That is 50% of all American oil imports. 50%. Not from Saudi Arabia, not from Venezuela, from the country Trump just declared economic war on. The act gives Ottawa the authority to restrict, redirect, or completely shut off that flow. 4 million barrels gone. Second, critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, the raw materials that go into every electric vehicle battery, every smartphone, every military drone, every satellite system the Pentagon operates. Canada is one of the world's top producers. Under the Act, export licenses for these minerals to the United States can be suspended with 30 days' notice. 30 days. That is how long American tech companies and defense contractors have before their supply chains go dark. Third, potash. Most Americans have never heard of it, but potash is the backbone of American agriculture. It is the primary ingredient in fertilizer. Without it, crop yields collapse. Canada produces 30% of the world's potash supply. The state of Saskatchewan alone exports more potash than most countries produce, and Carney just put that supply under federal review. Fourth, and this is the one that made Wall Street panic, airspace. Canada's airspace sits between the United States and Europe and between the continental US and Alaska. Every single day, American airlines fly thousands of commercial flights through Canadian airspace. If Canada restricts overflight rights, airlines have to reroute around the entire country. The estimated cost? $40 billion annually in additional fuel, crew time, and operational expenses. When that number hit the wires, American airline stocks collapsed. Delta, United, American Airlines, Southwest, a third of their market value evaporated in a single trading session. Visual prompt, a glowing map of North America at night. Bright red lines show oil pipelines, mineral supply routes, and flight paths from the U.S. through Canadian territory. One by one, each line turns dark, disconnected. Text overlay, 40 billion airspace shutdown. Cinematic 8K, satellite view, R16.9. Now let me show you what happened to the markets because the numbers tell the story Washington refuses to admit. Oil futures, 12% spike in 48 hours. That translates directly to higher gasoline prices at every pump in America within 2 weeks. Natural gas, up 18%. Heating bills in the Northeast, the states that depend on Canadian gas pipelines, about to surge heading into spring when contracts for next winter get locked in. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 800 points down in a single session. That is not a correction. That is a panic sell. Institutional investors dumping American equities because they just realized the country's supply chain has a single point of failure, and that point just became hostile. And here is the detail that should terrify every portfolio manager on Wall Street. This is not a tariff on steel. This is not a 10% surcharge on lumber. This is the threat of losing half your oil supply, your critical mineral pipeline, your agricultural inputs, and your commercial airspace in a single policy action. There is no substitute. There is no backup. There is no other Canada. If you are connecting the dots that most people miss, hit subscribe. I track these signals every single week, but the market damage was only the beginning because the real explosion happened inside American politics. Governors, Republican governors in the states that decide presidential elections turned on the White House within hours. Visual prompt. 3 American governors standing at separate podiums, each with their state flag. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. News tickers below each read, economic suicide. Split into a triptych layout, dramatic lighting, 8K, R16.9. Michigan, Governor's Office. Official statement within 6 hours of the executive order. Called it, and I quote, economic suicide. Michigan's auto industry depends on integrated supply chains with Ontario. Parts cross the border 6, 7, 8 times during manufacturing. A 60% tariff does not just raise prices, it kills the math entirely. Factories do not slow down, they shut down. Wisconsin, dairy, agriculture, manufacturing, all tied to Canadian raw materials and cross-border trade. The governor went on the record, calling the tariffs devastating and unnecessary. Pennsylvania, energy, steel, natural gas, a state already struggling with deindustrialization, now watching its energy costs spike because the country supplying its natural gas just became an adversary. These are not blue state critics. These are swing state leaders in the 3 states that decide who sits in the Oval Office. And here is the polling that makes this even worse for Washington. Nationally, 68% of Americans oppose the tariffs. In border states, the ones that actually feel the impact, 74% oppose them. Not a slim majority, a supermajority. Nearly 3 out of 4 Americans living within economic reach of Canada are telling the president he is wrong. That is not a policy debate. That is a political crisis. And while Washington was dealing with its own governors, Carney was already on the phone. Not with the White House, with everyone else. Visual prompt. A world map with glowing connection lines from Ottawa to Brussels, Tokyo, and Seoul. Each endpoint shows a flag and a signed document icon. Text overlay, new supply chains without America, blue and gold tones, 8K, R16.9. The European Union finalized an accelerated critical minerals agreement with Canada within the same week. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths routed to European battery factories and defense manufacturers. Not a memorandum of understanding, a binding procurement framework. Japan signed a long-term energy cooperation deal, securing Canadian LNG shipments through the expanded terminals in British Columbia. 4 new long-term contracts. Destination, Yokohama, Osaka, Nagoya. South Korea locked in cobalt and lithium supply agreements for its semiconductor and EV battery sectors. Samsung, LG, SK, the companies building the technology the entire world runs on, now sourcing directly from Canada. 3 continents, 3 deals, 1 week. All of it trade that used to flow through American channels, now permanently redirected. And Carney did not stop there. He filed simultaneous legal challenges under both USMCA, the trade agreement Trump himself signed in 2020, and through the World Trade Organization dispute resolution mechanism. The USMCA challenge is particularly devastating because Section 301 tariffs arguably violate the very agreement Trump celebrated as his greatest trade achievement. He is being sued under his own deal. The WTO filing invokes national treatment violations and most favored nation breaches, putting the United States on the same legal footing as countries under sanctions review. Canada is not just fighting back economically. Canada is building the legal infrastructure to make this permanent. Visual prompt, a dramatic courtroom-style graphic. On one side, the USMCA document with Trump's signature highlighted. On the other, a WTO gavel. Cracks spread across the USMCA document. Text overlay, sued under his own deal. Dark judicial tones, 8K, R16-9. So let me tell you where this leaves the United States right now. The markets are bleeding. Oil prices are climbing toward levels that will drive gasoline above $5 a gallon this summer. Airlines are facing a cost crisis that will either bankrupt smaller carriers or send ticket prices through the roof. 3 swing state governors are publicly opposing the president. 68% of Americans think this was a mistake. Canada is signing deals with Europe, Japan, and South Korea, deals that redirect supply chains permanently, and the legal challenges under USMCA and WTO will take years to resolve, years during which every new trade relationship Canada builds becomes more entrenched, more permanent, more irreversible. Here is the question nobody in Washington is asking. What exactly did America gain? Seriously, what is the strategic benefit of turning your largest trading partner, your most reliable energy supplier, the country that controls your airspace, your water, your critical minerals, into an adversary? The tariff revenue does not cover the market losses from day one. The political damage in swing states is already measurable. The supply chain alternatives Canada is building will outlast any presidency. For 80 years, the assumption in Washington was simple. Canada has no choice. Too integrated, too dependent, nowhere else to go. That assumption died this week, not in a speech, not in a tweet, in signed contracts with 3 continents, in a legal filing under America's own trade agreement, in a national security act that puts America's oil supply under a Canadian government switch. Trump declared economic war on Canada. The Dow crashed 800 points, oil spiked, airlines collapsed, governors revolted, and while all of that was happening, Mark Carney was quietly building the exit door that every middle power on earth is now watching. Because if Canada can survive an American economic war and come out with more partners, more leverage, and more options than it started with, then every country currently under American pressure is asking the same question. Why are we still playing by their rules? The old world ran on one assumption, that America's partners had no alternatives. This week, Canada proved they do, and once one country proves it, the rest will follow. This is not a trade dispute. This is the end of an era. Subscribe. The next chapter is already being written.